Story number 1. As my mother often said, I have seen and felt things that no one else around me could. As a small child, I would point at a shadow or a person who had no business being in my house or anywhere I happened to be, and ask, "Who is that?" The usual answer was, "No one. Be quiet," because my grandparents were very religious and felt that anything abnormal was the work of the devil, and my mother was easily frightened. After 18 years, going on 19, friends have always teased me by calling me their own personal Miss Cleo, a nickname they love to give me. Friends and family have recognized and accepted the fact that I have some kind of gift, even if I don't consider it particularly special. However, one of the most extraordinary experiences occurred this year, during a 4-month internship at my mother's workplace. I didn't just love the work, I loved much of what came with it. But my mother and my supervisor, whom I'll call DI, believed completely in what I do. One morning, while working from the home office, DI called to check in on my mother and me. She told my mother she felt the energy in the office needed to be cleansed, as we had been working for a solid month on a very stressful grant proposal to maintain our funding. Stress levels were at an all-time high, and she wanted to clear out all the negativity. She asked my mother to have me perform a cleansing and blessing, then report back on the results. After my mother gave me the instructions, I happily went into the office kitchen, took out some salt, poured it into a bowl, said a small blessing over it, and walked into the front office to begin the cleansing. What you need to know about this office, it wasn't just haunted, it had once been a seminary, and after that, the first brothel in our town. In a gentle sense, I already knew the place had spirits. One of them, named Bradley, still liked to tease and chat with me whenever I was there. On top of that, a month earlier, my mother had suffered a terrible nightmare in which a demon was whispering in her ear, trying to make her do terrible things, something that was very relevant to this story. I began the cleansing ritual, rubbing a bit of salt between my fingers and sprinkling it around the edges of the room. My mother had been listening to internet radio, and I asked her to turn it off. As I prayed, asking the goddess to cleanse this place and bless it, and all the good things I spoke, I heard a sound I still cannot properly describe. It was a deep, resonant voice, coming as though from the bottom of a very deep tunnel, almost as if I was not supposed to hear it. At first, I thought it was noise from outside, since the window was open. Then I thought it might be my mother's radio. So I turned to ask her to turn it off. My mother was sitting there, white as a ghost, trembling, staring at me. I quickly finished what I had to say and let the salt fall from my fingers before stepping forward to her desk. She looked at me and asked if I had heard it. I was completely shaken. The voice had been so evil it made me shudder. My mother was very frightened, and I felt deeply unsettled. So I asked her to follow me around the office while I finished the cleansing. We went back to her room. She looked like she was about to cry, and all she could say was that it had sounded horrible. It was like a demon crashing in, and then my mother's nightmare from the month before came flooding back to me. I asked her if I could perform a cleansing on her personally. She was reluctant at first. She'd had very bad experiences with the church and blessings, having grown up in a strict Pentecostal family, but she agreed. When I assured her I would not lay hands on her or speak in tongues, I stepped close to her, wrapped my arms around her shoulders, rested my chin on her head as she sat down. I began to pray, asking the goddess to cleanse the demon that had been tormenting her. Since I had never done anything quite like this before, I was a little nervous. My mother began to sob, great heaving, hysterical sobs, and at that point, I was genuinely beginning to lose my composure too. My mother is one of the strongest people I know, and seeing her that frightened and crying like that not only terrified me, it made me want to punch something as hard as I could. She looked at me and said, "And I will remember these words until the day I die because they pierced me so deeply I could feel them entering my ears. It hurts. It's talking to me. Do you understand? Callista, make it stop." I pulled her into a hug and put my mouth close to her ear, my own tears almost spilling over. In that moment, I truly didn't know what to do. so I just said what was rising from somewhere inside me. Meanwhile, the ghost Bradley I mentioned earlier was cowering in the back office, trying to pretend nothing was happening, or whatever it is ghosts do when they're distressed. I told the demon to leave my mother alone. What I now know was an incubus. I told it that my mother loved me more than she needed it, and I ordered it to leave her as fast as possible. I heard a strange hissing sound, and then it felt like breathing again after being underwater and holding your breath to the point of dizziness for an entire month. My mother and I had been fighting so bitterly that just looking at each other made me want to bang her head against the wall or scream in her face. I had chalked it up to work stress and the difficulty of working alongside your mother. Now I believe it was a demon feeding off our emotions, most intensely, the anger between us. When I got home, I performed the most thorough cleansing of my house I had ever done. And during the day at the office, I sat for half an hour watching a dark shape dart past the window as though it was trying to get back in. I am very glad it couldn't. Story number 2. When I was about 8 or 9, I was sharing a room with my father, and one night on the way home late with my mother, I looked down the hallway and saw a small creature wearing a hooded cloak, standing there staring at me. I could not see its eyes under the hood where its face should have been was pure darkness. When I told my mother, she looked down the hall and it was gone. About a week later, while I was sleeping, I felt something grabbing my feet. This time it had no hood. When I looked closely, it resembled a goblin or an orc from the Lord of the Rings. This kept happening for several months. Every time I woke up and saw it, I couldn't move or call out to my parents. I felt as though something was watching me, pinning me in place. Finally, one night when it was grabbing my feet, I gathered all my courage and swung my arm at it. It disappeared. Every night after that, I prayed, and I never saw it again. About 4 months ago, a friend of mine was telling a group at work about seeing a demon-like creature at his bedside when he was a child, and I finally told him my story. I sometimes wonder if others who have gone through this lived somewhere in San Pedro, California. There seem to be more black-eyed encounters in that area. Story number 3. It was a sunny day in November, and I had been running errands. I decided to stop at a Starbucks on the way home to get some tea. The place was busy, which wasn't unusual. I got my tea, walked out the door, and had to stop to sort out my bag because my keys had sunk to the bottom and I still needed to get my wallet out. I set everything down on an empty table and tried to reorganize myself. I felt like someone was watching me, so I turned to look. The sarcastic remark I'd been about to make died in my throat the moment I saw him and accidentally met his eyes. I should note there was nothing unusual or remarkable about the way he was dressed. Jeans, a black shirt, a thin black jacket, no hat or overcoat. His hair was nearly black, but no darker than my boyfriend's, who is Japanese. His skin was slightly olive and pale, but not extremely so. It was his eyes and the presence radiating from him that frightened me. His eyes were blacker than black. No white at all, solid black from edge to edge. I felt a darkness surrounding him, an evil. When I looked into his eyes, I somehow knew that the soul residing in that body was not a human one, and I could sense that he knew I knew. I had the feeling he enjoyed this, that he could keep the illusion of humanity at bay, and he was challenging me telepathically. I felt him say, "You're going to run too, aren't you?" And I replied, in my mind, "I'm going to leave because I had already planned to leave." Then I deliberately avoided his gaze and went back to gathering my things. I collected everything, packed up, and walked calmly back to my car. Somehow I felt it was important to show no fear, because he was still watching me, so I walked briskly, got in the car, and drove away. That encounter terrified me deeply. But now I know that we are not alone in this world. We share it with other non-human entities. Story number 4. It was around 7 p.m. I was home alone, my parents were out, and I was sitting at my desk doing homework. Suddenly a chill ran down my spine, and I immediately sensed a presence in the house. I was afraid that if I turned around, something would try to kill me. I ran out of the room and into the living room. I was starting to calm myself down, telling myself I was just being paranoid and there was no one in the house, when I heard a voice whisper right next to my ear. It said something like, "I will be waiting for you." The voice was deeply strange. It sounded like the voice of the dead. Needless to say, I was terrified and ran to a neighbor's house to tell them what had happened. They agreed to come look, but there was seemingly no one at home in my house. The neighbor gave up and told me I must have imagined it, then went home. I was still frightened when my parents came home and I told them what had happened. Of course, they didn't believe me. That night, I woke up at around 3 a.m. I didn't know why I'd woken up, but I remember feeling very afraid. Immediately, I felt that same familiar chill and sensed someone else in the room with me. Then I heard the voice again, but this time the words were longer, drawn out. "How can I wait for you?" I screamed, and my parents came running in. I told them what I had heard. They comforted me, said I had probably dreamed the voice and that I was safe, that nothing would hurt me. And eventually I calmed down, though still frightened, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and sat up and immediately noticed something was wrong. I looked at my dresser and saw that my crucifix necklace was no longer there. I jumped up and frantically searched the room. I had nearly given up when I stepped on something sharp. I looked down and saw my beloved necklace shattered into tiny fragments scattered across the floor. It looked as though it had been covered in blood. Some of the pieces rusted and dark red. I have never heard that voice again. I believe I had an encounter with an evil being, a fallen angel from hell. Story number 5. My son Caleb was about 2.5 years old, and throughout his short life he had been experiencing strange things. Cold spots, rocking chairs, moving on their own, talking to walls, orbs of light appearing in his photos. But this was different. This was dangerous. He was waking up at night, screaming for me to come into his room, yet he would never go to my room on his own unless told, "Yes, you can come sleep in my bed." That was strange, specific, and deeply unsettling. The skin around his eyes was bruised looking, and when he hugged me, he was always trembling, and I could physically feel him draining my energy. He complained about a man with big round eyes who sat beside his bed at night, swinging and rocking, telling him he was a bad boy for wanting to come to my room. He said that when I came into his room, it would run down the hallway chasing me, screaming, "Bad boy, bad boy." You can imagine what that was like, my son terrified in his room and me powerless to do anything. I'm not a believer by nature, but I had to believe my son, and when he started talking about incense and candles at 3 a.m., believe me, I listened. By this point, we had noticed a pattern. He would be very distressed, then suddenly go calm and fall asleep in a state of complete exhaustion. It was always at that moment he would talk about Echo. Echo was a big man with wings. Echo kept things from disturbing him. We had witnessed light bulbs shattering overhead, things screaming my name, a pentagram shape that my son had chosen for me that burned into my chest, and sometimes the sweetest smell of jasmine, and I saw lights too. No one around us could deny what was happening. Caleb was terrified of his bedroom. He would wet himself and faint if the door was shut. His toys would be moved around. He kept saying it was a friend who remembered him from when he was with his father. A good friend took us to a spiritual shop where I met a woman who held my son's hand and spoke with him about the entity beside his bed. They discussed Echo and the winged being who came to help him. She wept as she led my son through the shop and asked him to point out Echo. He pointed to a painting of Archangel Michael, tears streaming down his face. She explained that Echo was the language of the angels, and that Echo was Michael. In her words, my son was an indigo child. She gave us the authority to drive this thing out. While burning incense and saying prayers, my son led me through every room in the house, pointing and commanding, "There, Mommy. Chase it. Get it to the door." I couldn't see anything myself, but the moment we got close to the front door, something ice cold grabbed my leg and began climbing up me. The cold was excruciating, like being stabbed with ice. Caleb flung open the door, and in the most powerful, beautiful voice, he cried out, "Michael, save my mom. Michael, save me. If you're not welcome here, then go, get out, go toward the light. Don't be afraid, I promise it'll be okay. Michael, Grandma, help me." The cold snapped away and the door slammed shut. I stood there. Yes, I had wet myself, staring at my beautiful blue-eyed boy, and I swear I could see the man he would one day become. He let go of my hand, walked into the living room, opened a bag of crisps, put on A Bug's Life, and sat down on the sofa. I followed and just watched. I asked if he was okay, if it was over. He looked at me, this 3-year-old, and said, "I just want to be a little boy for a while, Mommy. Don't talk about it anymore." All I could do was love him more for that. It's now been 4 years. He's about to turn 7. 6 months ago, he came downstairs and asked for his angel oracle cards. He hadn't touched them in all that time. He opened the box, turned the whole deck upside down, and shuffled them scattered across the floor. He closed his eyes, placed his hands over the disordered pile, and drew one card. It was Archangel Michael. He smiled and said, "Mommy, it's time." He now collects crystals, reads tarot, speaks to Michael, photographs spirits, makes predictions, reads minds, but most of all, what he does is love me unconditionally. I love my son no matter who or what he is, but being able to hold a true earthly angel in my arms every night is the greatest feeling in the universe. Story number 6. 3 Halloween encounters. There is a reason Halloween falls in autumn. If it were held in the heat of summer or the dead of winter, it simply wouldn't be the same. Dusk falls early. The air turns cold. The trees shed their rotting leaves, and the earth prepares for its dark sleep, for death. It is no wonder we all feel that chill at this time of year, that heightened awareness that there are unknown things, mysterious things out there in the darkness. The evil black dog, JF, lived in a small area of Texas, a place with little more than a gas station, a school, houses, and cattle. She generally considered it pretty dull. But a few days before Halloween one year, everything changed. JF was driving her boyfriend home at about 8:30 p.m. She described herself as someone who could almost always sense danger or evil immediately. And sure enough, her heart started racing for no apparent reason. She broke out in a cold sweat despite the air conditioning being on full blast. "I had a very strange feeling that something evil was up ahead," she said. From over a hill, about 2 minutes from her house, a large black dog suddenly crossed in front of her car. She found it strange that the animal walked across the road with no fear of being hit. She braked and stopped about 5 feet away. The dog just stood there staring at her. She turned on her high beams, and its eyes turned a glowing amber red. It stood there for about a minute, then walked away. She floored the gas and sped off, and when she glanced back, the dog had vanished completely. JF continued home but could not shake the strange dread that had gripped her before and during the encounter. She believes the dog was the catalyst for a deeply terrifying dream she had a few nights later. In the dream, she was in her music room. When the music stopped, she looked at her iPod. It was still playing, but there was no sound. She looked at the door, and a man was standing there staring at her. He wore a long black coat. His face was red and cracked with black fissures, and he had horns. His eyes were a deep yellow with no pupils, and long fangs protruded from his mouth. He said, "It's time." And that's when she noticed a clock on his left wrist. As he spoke, smoke poured from his breath and the stench of burning rotten flesh filled the air. He grabbed her by the throat, and that's when she woke up. The first smell that hit her was burning rotten flesh. JF has been haunted by these connected experiences ever since. The Halloween fairy. Fairy costumes had long been a traditional Halloween staple, but what Richard saw on Halloween night 2008 was not a child in costume. It was Halloween night, and Richard had taken his children to their elementary school in central New Jersey for a party held in the school's large cafeteria, decorated in Halloween themes with orange lights. A DJ played music, and a costumed teacher handed out glowing orange trick-or-treat bags. While his children were enjoying the festivities, Richard slipped out to the parking lot for a quick smoke, keeping an eye on the kids through the windows. While standing outside, he noticed something small but very bright, an orange glowing light dancing at the top of a tree at the far end of the parking lot. At first, he didn't think much of it, maybe a reflection of the orange party lights, he thought. But the more he watched, the more puzzled he became. The glowing orange light was fluttering like a butterfly, moving erratically up and down and side to side, about 20 feet off the ground. He wondered if someone had hung a Halloween ornament on a string from a pole and it was swinging in the wind, but that didn't make sense either. As he was pondering it, the light flew toward the row of trees and disappeared. He walked to the far end of the parking lot to see if anyone was on the grass near the trees. Aside from someone who appeared to be sleeping in one of the cars, there was no one in sight. "I can only conclude," he said, "that it must have been a fairy enjoying the holiday. The gnome demon." Amanda's Halloween experience occurred in 2008, just before the holiday. No matter how hard she tries, she cannot forget it or convince herself she was mistaken about what she saw. "I was driving to my parents' house for Sunday dinner," Amanda said. It was a trip from her home near Pinrest in Campbell County, Tennessee, to her parents' more rural home about 5 miles from town. It was a sunny autumn afternoon, around 4 p.m., and Amanda was driving fairly quickly along a winding road. Her daughter was in the passenger seat. Amanda had just come around a bend when she suddenly had to swerve toward the driver's side to avoid hitting something lying on the right shoulder of the road. She slowed down and looked more closely. Whatever it was lying partly on the road, legs stretched out in front, back to the road, its feet reaching into someone's driveway. At first, she thought it was a Halloween decoration, maybe a stuffed mannequin someone had placed there. It was dressed entirely in black hat, straight black hair cut to the collar. She said it looked like a mannequin because it was slightly slumped, and the back of its jacket looked lumpy, as if stuffed with leaves. Amanda drove slowly past it, somewhat annoyed that this prank had nearly caused an accident. But then it became very clear this was not a Halloween prop. It turned and looked at her. "The best way I can describe its face," she said, "is that it looked gaunt and wrinkled, like a dried apple. Its face was as black as the rest of it, and it didn't move except for a slow turn of its head to glance at me over its shoulder." Her daughter stared at her in shock, and Amanda floored the gas. She was horrified, and when she reached her parents, she described it to her mother as a gnome demon, which she admitted sounded ridiculous, but was exactly right. Her mother laughed at her, though her daughter backed up the story. Her daughter insisted it was just someone in a costume, but why would anyone be sitting in such a dangerous spot on the road? Amanda never saw it again, and she has never forgotten it. She thinks about it every single time she drives past that stretch of road. Her family still teases her about it, so she doesn't tell anyone anymore. Story number 7. A bit of background. As a child, I used to have strange sleep paralysis episodes. My body would lock up, I'd be completely awake in the night, and the terror was overwhelming. I used to scream to break out of the paralysis, which greatly alarmed my parents. I remember telling my father about it when I was around 5. As a teenager, I had one particularly striking experience. While napping on the sofa on a quiet afternoon, my legs began to float upward while my head remained pinned to the cushion. This sparked my curiosity about these experiences, and in college, I began researching out-of-body experiences alongside some significant drug experimentation. I never achieved an OBE despite many attempts at meditation. The closest I got was a few light vibrations on my skin, something like goosebumps. Afterward, I became a doctor, and through scientific medical training, I came to attribute these experiences to unusual neurological phenomena. I explained my experiences as typical sleep paralysis. In recent years, I also became a firm atheist, choosing to believe only in what is tangible in this world. About a year ago, I began experiencing something new. Roughly once a month, I would wake from deep sleep with very strong vibrations and a sensation of hurtling toward the ceiling. I had also suffered from body paralysis as a child, which terrified me back then. But now as an adult, I simply observed what was happening with calm curiosity. For the past year, I'd thought of it as some peculiar neurological phenomenon that happens to certain people, since the brain still holds many mysteries. However, because of my earlier interest in OBEs, each time I felt the vibrations and that rushing sensation, I tried to go with it. But the result was always just opening my eyes and waking up. My skin always felt slightly numb afterward. Then last night, something happened. One of the most profound experiences of my life. My girlfriend woke up at around 4 a.m. to leave for work, and I was briefly roused to say goodbye, then fell back asleep. It was raining, and I drifted in and out. I had a very vivid dream in which I was fighting some kind of demon in order to save a group of people. In the dream, I had superhuman strength and felt very powerful. I thought nothing of it. It didn't feel different from any other dream. The dream ended. I was lying in bed, half asleep in the room, and then suddenly the paralysis hit, and I realized there was a woman standing in front of me. The room looked like I was seeing everything through narrowed, half-shut eyes. I remember being paralyzed and drowsy, and my first thought was simply that my girlfriend must have come back. The woman stepped toward the side of my bed, and only then did I realize it was not my girlfriend. I don't understand why I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't. I stayed completely calm. I tried to kick her, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the vibrations began, identical to what I'd felt over the past year, but enormously amplified. If I had to describe the feeling in one word, it would be electrocution. As a doctor, I imagined it must feel something like a seizure, my entire body charged, shaking intensely, the same current I had felt before, but surging. I knew this experience was different from anything before. It felt like I finally had the opportunity to go through. So I rolled, and it worked perfectly. I separated from my body, completely. I was fully conscious and aware of everything, but still half paralyzed, seeing only through narrow slits. I watched the woman step out of the apartment, passing straight through the wall. I floated up near the ceiling, telling myself to break through the roof or a wall, anything. Slowly, gradually, I drifted back down into my body. And yet every part of me still felt electrically charged, a tingling at my fingertips, in my brain, behind my eyes. I felt I could sense it in the air itself. So I decided to try again, and rolled out a second time. This time I stood more upright, and could see the room a little more clearly. The sensation was like being drunk, floating vertically, but slightly tilted, my head grazing the wall. I marveled at how solid the wall felt, hard as concrete, completely tangible. I was able to turn and look around a bit more, then slowly sank toward the floor, leaning against the bedside table. But I was lighter than air, so even that awkward angle caused no pain. I must have remained in that state for some time. About 10 minutes later, still paralyzed, propped against the bedside table, floating, I rolled back into my body and opened my eyes. Throughout that entire experience, I was completely conscious and aware of everything around me. That is what convinced me. For the first time, I had experienced something that exists outside our three-dimensional world, the woman, the things I felt, the current. This was not a trick of the mind, not even a little. I am by nature a skeptic. This stunned me. I felt elevated the entire day at work, as though I'd been granted permission. I believe that whatever that woman or entity was who entered my bedroom that night gave me a kind of energy, if you understand what I mean. And the feeling she left behind was this: there is still so much, so very much left to discover and experience. Story number 8. This happened when I was 19 years old and attending a local Catholic college. The nuns who ran the school held an annual retreat that all Catholic students were required to attend. As a devout Catholic, I went eagerly, excited to spend time with friends on what felt like a group outing. The retreat lasted 3 days, with around 150 female students staying on campus the entire time. We prayed, sang hymns, and attended Mass. A priest named Father Joe had been invited to celebrate Mass for us. During this time, there was a girl named Beverly who belonged to one of the popular cliques. She had dark brown skin, long black hair, and was known for her long painted nails. On the second evening of the retreat, around 9 p.m., Father Joe was leading a prayer session, invoking the names of many saints and asking for their intercession. The atmosphere was solemn and reverent, and many of us were moved to tears. Suddenly, we noticed Beverly behaving very strangely. Her face was contorted, her hair fell loose around her face, and her eyeballs looked enormous and completely white. She could not stay seated in her chair and kept trying to lunge at the priest. The most terrifying thing was her nails. They looked like the claws of a demon. She used them to scratch at the wooden window frames. She was in a violent rage, her voice alternating between a man's and a woman's, both deep and hoarse. She kept screaming, with increasing threats to kill him. She said her name was Margaret, and that before her death she had worked as a maid in Beverly's house. The nuns and some of the older girls struggled desperately to restrain her. Father Joe called for a stole. Needless to say, we were absolutely terrified and fled to our rooms, where we stayed for the rest of the night. After the ordeal, Beverly only fell asleep toward dawn. She returned to normal and remembered nothing of what had happened. I have never forgotten this, and it haunts me to this day. Story number 9. When I was about 16 or 17, I was listening to a heavy metal cassette, specifically Iron Maiden, that my older brother disapproved of. It had actually been his tape, but he didn't want me exposed to some of the demonic content in it. I don't remember the exact conversation, but when he told me he didn't want me listening to it, I snapped back with some stupid remark about liking the devil or something like that. He immediately yanked the tape out of the car stereo and threw it out the window. I was furious at him for a long time, because it was a great tape and I really loved it at the time. When I got home that evening, I regretted what I'd said. I hadn't meant it. I'd only said it to provoke him, to get back at him. In truth, I was a little frightened by my own words. A bit of background about our house. My parents were passionate antique collectors, and the home was designed to look like an old house even though it was only about 20 years old. It had lots of old wood, antiqued paint, hand-blown glass windows, and was actually pieced together from parts of genuinely old houses that had been demolished. My actual bedroom was being renovated at the time, so I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a tiny little room. The room had 2 doors, but only about a foot of space beside the mattress. At bedtime, I was still a bit shaken, so I turned on the light in the adjacent room and left that door open so I could see clearly. I said goodnight to my mother and lay down. I had been lying there for about 30 seconds when I heard very small footsteps approaching. The floors in this house were old wood. You could hear everyone come and go. Every floor creaked. You could usually tell who was walking, but these steps were too light for that. I assumed it must be my mother, so I called out, "Mom." Less than 2 or 3 seconds later, that door slammed shut, plunging me into complete darkness, and almost simultaneously I heard what sounded like tiny running footsteps, coming from the other side of the room, right across the narrow strip of floor right beside my head. It couldn't have been a person. There was no room. I was absolutely terrified. I yanked the covers over my head and, for the first time in my life, broke out into a cold sweat. I sat there, mind racing, realizing that whatever had just run into my room was still right there beside me. I'm not sure if seconds or minutes passed. I was too frightened to know. Finally, I made a decision. I threw the covers off and bolted for the other door on the opposite side of the room. I made it out without incident and ran to get my brothers, who were working out in the garage. I told them to come check the room. Everything appeared normal, but when we went inside, I noticed that the door that had slammed shut was now wide open. My brothers swore up and down they had nothing to do with what I had experienced, and I absolutely believed them. It could not have been a person. The sounds, the darkness, the tiny footsteps, I had never imagined anything like it. I am 100% certain I was not asleep. It happened, and I cannot explain it, but I'll tell you one thing. I never said anything that stupid again. Story number 10. There is something strange about Quebec, Canada, specifically the city of Laval, in the Chomedey district, not far from Mont. Too many strange phenomena have occurred here over the past few decades. Let me tell you about the most famous one, and I was one of the witnesses. In June 1976, people found deep hoof prints pressed into the asphalt in my neighborhood, just around the corner. To this day, no method has successfully reproduced those prints. They were not paint or any known substance, and they looked like the hooves of a goat, hundreds of prints stretching all the way down a small street. They began in the middle of the road and ended just as mysteriously a few steps later. No clue as to where they came from or where they went when they disappeared. It was as though the devil had briefly passed through our world, walked around for a moment, and vanished as soon as he arrived. Every single print was different, something a specialist confirmed was not a hoax. The entire region heard about those prints. A well-known local paranormal expert, Christian Robert Pig, also investigated them. For my part, when I saw them with my own eyes, I wasn't particularly impressed. I was still very young, only about 10. It's only now, looking back, that I connect the dots. There were rumors of satanic activity in the area. And if any of that was true, those prints were very likely the devil paying a visit to his fan club. It seems the coven gave their idol the wrong address.